Welcome to another Talking Feds one-on-one. I'm really pleased to be here today with Congressman Dan Goldman, who's in his second term representing New York's 10th district. But for a relatively junior member, Dan occupies, I think, an outsized role in the national effort to try to keep the Trump administration in check. That's because he served previously both as a federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York and, as many of you probably remember, lead counsel in the first impeachment, which gave him both battle scars, but also insights on how to fight back against some of the abuses of Trump 2.0. He also is a friend and was a friend and colleague before ascending to his current Olympian position. So welcome, Dan Goldman. Good to see you.
Thanks, Harry. Still a friend, even if not a colleague. And
Right.
proud to be a former Fed as well on Talking
There
Feds.
you go. You just got a lot more friends these days. How many constituents in the 10th district? Downtown Manhattan?
775,000.
And counting. Okay. I want to ask you first about this apparent deal between immigration authorities and the IRS, and in part because of our shared DOJ background. So as I understand it, the IRS has quietly inked a deal with ICE to share tax data on undocumented immigrants. You know, I always thought of that as a third rail, and I thought other taxpayers did as well. Do you have a sense? What the hell's happening?
We know what's happening, which is that there is an outright assault on all forms of immigration and immigrants generally. And we can all agree that convicted felons should be removed and deported. There's no doubt. And there are many who have not been deported for a variety of reasons that we should be redoubling efforts to do that. But what we're talking about here are undocumented immigrants who are working on the books, who are trying to assimilate and integrate into our economy and our country, voluntarily trying to pay taxes so that they can become significant and contributing members of society, and $9 billion of taxes, by the way, annually. And they were naturally promised, as we all are, that their tax information would remain private. And as you know, Harry, tax information is protected far more than any type of
right. I mean, even from prosecutors, right?
Yes.
It is for I really think of it as the final frontier. So yeah.
And so this is, as you point out, very scary because I don't know what the legal basis is. Certainly just from a morals perspective, to have promised these people that it would not be used against them on their immigration, and now to just flip that switch is a tremendous breach of that agreement. But you hit the nail on the head, and we don't know the answer to what the terms of this agreement are. And that's why I co-led a letter with Jimmy Gomez, representative from out your way in California, asking Secretary Noem and Secretary Bessent to understand the full terms of this agreement between DHS and the IRS, because it has an impact not just on undocumented immigrants, it has an impact on many, many people. If all of a sudden our tax information is available to every executive branch agency and Doge and Elon Musk, that's a real issue that the American taxpayer and voter needs to know.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a nightmare, and as you say, a complete just broken promise. And there are certain things they're doing that the law may be able to remedy, but this is a once the barn door open kind of problem. If it's found, as it's likely to be, it seems to me illegal. What's the remedy, especially if they've already used it to deport people? It really seems like a total mess to me. So you've gotten this, we really are just in the early stages of even having a sense what's happening, much less how to try to push back.
Well, hopefully, yes. I mean, we are asking in Congress. The problem, of course, is that in the minority, we don't have subpoena power. So we can demand this information, we can ask for this information, we can use public pressure to get this information, but we have no form of compulsion, even to the extent that they would comply with a congressional subpoena. And so I hope there's a FOIA litigation on this, and that's a different way that private litigants can get access to this information. They'll drag it out. They'll be difficult, but we have to use all measures available to us to expose what is truly going on in this administration.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point that I haven't thought of. So, have there been? Do we know that the administration, which seems poised to disregard any kind of request command from Congress, at least from the minority, perhaps from the courts, is it responding to FOIA requests? Do we know? I would think it would just also, file it in the back of the filing cabinet.
Yeah, I think what they're trying to do at this point is appear as if they still are complying with court orders. They certainly are not saying publicly that we are not complying. Obviously, there are several cases now where that just is not consistent with the facts. But Trump has said he will follow court orders. And so I don't know where, FOIA's, as you know, is fairly lengthy and complicated litigation.
Yeah.
But I have no information that they're not following the proper procedures.
Very good. And on the general point, as you're following, maybe we'll talk in the future. They seem to be tiptoeing a lot closer to the precipice here in both Abrego Garcia case and now, as I'm sure you know, and our listeners know, the Judge Boasberg has just looks as if he's going to convene a hearing to see if they should be held in criminal contempt. All right, jumping around a fair bit, but you also have a pretty wide span. So just briefly on the tariffs. So does your district actually encompass Wall Street?
Yes.
Yeah, and so it's, seen as very much, oh, he's doing this, and the stock market is, erratic and all over the map. But it's normally thought that tariffs, even the stock market, don't directly trigger recession, and that recession really punishes sort of everyday Americans, and more than half of which don't have big holdings in the stock market. What's your sense or level of concern that these tariffs, and not just the tariffs really, but I talked to Paul Krugman about this, and just the erratic lurching back and forth are in fact harbingers of a not just stock market tumult, but actual recession in mainstream America?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, plenty of people with 401ks have been significantly hurt by the volatility in the stock market. A number of whom I'm sure sold at the bottom because they were worried their entire retirement funds would be gone. And it has not bounced back to where it was prior to the tariffs. And the volatility itself is very dangerous for the market and for investors. Then you have all of the price increases from the tariffs that are passed through as a tax to the consumers. So even those who don't own stock are certainly paying more. You have an increase in inflation, but the structural damage that these tariffs are doing and have the potential to do is really where the financial industry and corporate America is concerned about. And what you described with Paul Krugman's view of the uncertainty, the unpredictability, the complete lack of an economic strategy that makes any kind of sense. It's more like a pissing contest between Trump and whoever is going to stand up to him. And you know that it's bad because he tried to claim victory with a great deal when some countries called him. Now, I'm not a businessman or an expert on deals, but getting a phone call out of tariffs that are destroying our economy does not seem to be a good deal. But the structural issues, because of all that uncertainty, is making banks, corporate America, completely retrench. They are not spending money. They are laying off people. They are just holding tight with whatever they have because they don't know what's coming. So that means unemployment goes up. That means that the capital markets are closed, which means there's no investment in new either research and development or new transactions. And that just completely stifles our economy. Then when you add to it that, and this gets a little bit weedy, but the concern is from sort of economists is less the stock market itself, but if both the stock market and the bond market are starting to turn the wrong way, which is what happened right before Trump reversed the tariffs, that is a recipe for disaster. And I've spoken to CEOs of the major banks who say that they are getting into sort of COVID risk control mode.
Yeah.
And so are many of their top clients. And we know that that's dangerous and that's going to be terrible for the economy. And there was no reason why. This is completely self-inflicted.
Yeah, well, that's one really remarkable thing to me. Presidents often take credit for economic gains or losses when it's not clear they really have the ability. But this one's, it says Donald Trump all over it. It really is single-handed, and just the inconstancy. I don't think it's that hard to grasp. You're like, what the hell he's gonna be doing next week? I don't know if this is the right time to invest in a whole new, factory or the like. Okay, so that's it, and it's an important point, I think, because it is. Well, let me ask one quick follow up. You do have the first hint, it seems, the first whispers of some grumbling among his Republican allies in Congress, and even about these tariffs. Do you get those sort of vibrations? Would you even get them, Dan? Do you have a sense that there are people who are maybe thinking of not being in lockstep with him over this issue?
Yeah, well, look, we've seen Republican senators and members of Congress introduce bills to curtail the tariffs. But what's very interesting about it is that the leadership in the House and the Senate of the Republican Party has squashed those efforts. And in fact, Speaker Mike Johnson went so far as to make a complete exception in a rule bill that was passed last week that took away Congress's authority to effectively vote on the tariffs, because the tariffs are based on a declaration of an invocation of emergency powers. That Emergency Powers Act allows Congress to have a period of 15 calendar days within which the Congress has to vote on the emergency and effectively the tariffs. And he not only didn't want to put it to a vote, but he literally took Congress's authority, statutory authority away. His own statutory authority away, because I do think he's worried that it would pass, it would overturn and reverse Donald Trump's invocation, because if Republicans have to go on record on this, some of them certainly would not be able to support it. And so rather than try to stand up to Trump and say, listen, we got a lot of people here who don't like this, you got to fix something. No, he's just taking away his own authority as a check and a balance on Donald Trump to continue to just suck up to Trump and do whatever he says. It's shameful. It's disgraceful. And it's part of the reason why we're barreling towards a constitutional crisis, because the Republicans in Congress are simply not a check and balance. They are not serving their role under the Constitution as a co-equal branch.
Yeah, I mean, there's a broader theme here. Why are we failing? Maybe the Constitution can only do so much, but certainly we know that the framers, they assumed Congress would, every branch would zealously defend its own prerogatives, and who really had on the bingo card, Congress just, please steamroll me and, do it again.
Talking Feds is supported by the Brennan Center for Justice. In this new political era, the Brennan Center will do what they do best: defend the Constitution and the rule of law. They're prepared to fight against presidential overreach and will continue advocating for reforms to resist weaponized government, stop billionaires from corrupting our elections, and ensure every eligible American has the freedom to vote. Stay informed by visiting BrennanCenter.org.
In fact, I wanted to move from the weeds to the ether because something it seems you have done in your career, including especially when you, during the first impeachment, is sort of bring home in concrete terms the actual risk to what seem like abstract, grandiose notions like rule of law and constitutional structure. I feel that that's a lot of what I try to sound the alarm about. And it feels like something of a challenge next to the tariffs are going to lead to $12 eggs or whatever. But you, I think also Senator Murphy, a few others, maybe your colleague Jamie Raskin, are trying to put what strikes me as this most fundamental of concerns to the American people. What's your sort of sense or strategy, and how do you make that kind of thing hit home?
Yeah, and I think it is sometimes a challenge because it does seem a little further removed from the daily, weekly, monthly bills that are increasing and the costs that are going up. But what we are seeing is, and part of this is you and I have both studied Donald Trump for a long time, and I spent a long time really immersed in understanding how he works. And what we are seeing is a very methodical but purposeful march towards a dictatorship. And I don't say that lightly because that's a very strong statement. But if you just follow what's happened over the past couple months, you can really you can see the pattern and you can see the path. And it started with pardoning violent criminals, January 6th.
On day one, right?
Defendants on day one, who now he has created essentially a right-wing militia that will do whatever he says. Shortly after that, he fired nearly every inspector general of all the executive branch agencies. The ones, who are supposed to, who are responsible for rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse and doing those investigations to determine what is waste, fraud, and abuse, but who are also the ones who are independently supposed to keep executive branch officials accountable. He laid that foundation so that when his political hacks and lackeys took over senior positions, Hegseth, Kash Patel, Pam Bondi, Tulsi Gabbard, there would be no check on them from within those agencies. And now we are really starting to see him push the envelope. He's certainly talking more, saying he's serious about a third term. And he's not imagining an election. He is imagining in 3.5 years that he will have some reason or some excuse why he has to continue to be president. He has directed his attorney general to go after, with a criminal investigation, 2 people who simply spoke out against him. That is crossing a Rubicon that has never been crossed before. He's now effectively defying the Supreme Court order in the Abrego Garcia case, where the Supreme Court said very clearly that he was not provided due process. He has to be provided due process, and that the Trump administration must facilitate his return. And they've done nothing, apparently, other than, I guess, we don't know exactly what they said to the president of El Salvador. But what we're really starting to see repeated efforts to undermine our democratic institutions, to undermine the rule of law, to politicize and weaponize, the FBI, which, as you know, Harry, doesn't just render those investigations highly suspect and not credible, but it affects every single investigation that the FBI does, because how are you supposed to know whether it's legitimate or it's politicized? And is canceling collective bargaining agreements for federal employees. Well, if he's canceling those collective bargaining agreements for federal employees, what's to stop him or others from canceling collective bargaining agreements for other private sector unions? And then what's to stop a business from saying, well, the president's not abiding by the contracts that he's obligated to follow. Why should I? So you can really start to see how our entire economy, how our entire government is predicated on this idea of the rule of law, of democracy and the Constitution, and he's whittling away at so many aspects of it in a very clear and methodical way. And yes, it will not have an impact on the price of eggs this week, but it will lead to chaos. It will lead to an economic collapse. It will lead to terrorist attacks on our shores. It will lead to other countries running away from us and therefore not sharing intelligence with us, not being there to defend us. It will lead to China emerging as the number one global force in all ways. And it will lead to the demise of the United States. And so we have to talk about it because it is happening. And while it doesn't have immediate direct consequences on very many Americans, it will have much greater consequences if he ever achieves his ultimate goal.
Yeah, which he is on the way. It's a really important point, and it will lead, I'll just add a few things. I mean, it will lead to our being like Hungary. It will lead to all of us living under, great conditions of absolute absence of freedom, inability to criticize leaders and the like. I just want to put in one word for our former colleagues at DOJ. You mentioned the FBI, but now we've had career assistants fired who were pursuing a prosecution against a Trump ally. We've had the whole debacle that happened in New York, as I'm sure you know better than I do, with Mayor Adams. And so that, again, just as you mentioned, the broader resonance of what happens in the FBI, you just got to have assistants. I mean, I've spoken to some of them who are like thinking, if I bring a political corruption case against a Republican, am I not only going to get squelched but fired, as happened? And that, at that point, you don't have a functioning criminal justice system, and we are really, really hurting. Okay, well, I think you put it really well, Dan. Let me just I wanted to close because of your experience in 2017. You mentioned Abrego Garcia. Something that really struck, and there's a lot of ways in which what they certainly seem to be gearing up to do is of a piece, in some ways condign with what he did with Zelensky that led to the first impeachment. But I couldn't help but notice, of course, it's part of the way the political pieces are now on the board. Nobody seemed to have the same level of outrage. They thought, oh, this is some kind of little theater piece. But, this struck me, especially when you consider the ultimate kind of constitutional violation that's been found, as partially a sign anyway of the greater appetite for abuses than we had back in 2017 when it produced an impeachment. Just wonder if you have any thoughts about the Abrego Garcia and maybe Boasberg situation and the actual events that led to the first impeachment.
Well, I think what led to the first impeachment was a gross abuse of power for his own personal benefit, right? For his own electoral benefit. What he is doing now is, I think, more of an attack on our government, our system of government, and the rule of law to pave the way for him to assume more and more power. He is now using that power in an incredibly corrupt way on many fronts, and whether it be his crypto company or his investments in a Saudi-backed golf league, or so many different grifts, and nobody's even talking about the fact that he hasn't divested from any of these companies, the fact that he still is making money from foreign countries. I mean, the Republicans ran
shaking him down to give $40 million to Melania, and it's a family affair here.
Yeah, and the Republicans last Congress ran an entire impeachment investigation into Joe Biden for receiving, allegedly, which they couldn't prove, receiving money from China.
Yeah.
And Donald Trump is doing that every day with our foreign countries. So it is hard sometimes to keep up with all of it. But the fact that you're getting these judges who are now saying, in the Abrego Garcia case, you have done nothing to follow the Supreme Court order. In the Judge Boasberg case now, to say that you clearly and expressly violated my order by continuing to fly people out of the country. We are now getting, I think, in much more serious trouble, because it's not just for his personal gain. It is fundamental to our system of government. And the reason why I think it's not getting that much attention is, of course, through the gaslighting and the allegations that Abrego Garcia is some MS-13 mastermind. There's no evidence that a federal court has found that can support even his connection to MS-13. There's essentially an uncorroborated confidential informant many years ago, and you and I both know from being federal prosecutors.
Oh, and the Chicago Bulls paraphernalia. Right, of course. Can't forget that.
Right? Yeah, that's true. I mean, that would be insufficient for us as prosecutors to even see probable cause.
Even start an investigation. Yeah. That's right. That's right.
And so, yeah, I do think that the danger where the Republicans in Congress have abdicated their role, and now the administration is starting to chip away at these court opinions, is we are on the precipice now of what would be a true constitutional crisis, because if he does start defying court orders and Congress is not providing a check and a balance, there's no check and balance on Donald Trump. And that's where we are heading right now.
Look, I just got to concur. And at one point that brought home what you were just saying, the point you made about the third term, in 2017, he was aggrandizing himself for political power to win re-election. That doesn't seem to be in his mind at all to continue to serve. He just has to break the Constitution, and that seems the focus. Dan Goldman, really great to talk to you. So good that your insights, chops, and experience are there on the front lines, and hope to have a chance to compare notes soon.
Absolutely, Harry. Great to see you and to speak to you. Keep going with your success.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.